Hi, I'm Amy Goodman. Did you know you can get Democracy Now!'s headlines and stories delivered directly to your inbox every day? Just text Democracy Now!, one word, no space. Text Democracy Now! To 66866 to subscribe to our daily digest, and you'll never miss a story. Once again, Democracy Now! One word to 66866. Thanks so much, and stay safe. From New York, this is Democracy Now!
We congratulate the great victory to the whole Afghan nation, especially to the people of Kabul and to our mujahideens. The way we have come through was unexpected, as we have reached a position which was never expected.
The Taliban has seized control of Afghanistan, taking over the presidential palace in Kabul after Afghan President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. The Biden administration's bringing back 6,000 troops to Afghanistan as the U.S. military takes control of the international airport in Kabul, where thousands of Afghans and foreign nationals are desperately trying to flee. This all comes just a month after President Biden dismissed the possibility of a Taliban takeover.
But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
We'll go to Kabul for the latest, then to Haiti, where the death toll has reached 1,300 people, 5,000 injured, following a 7.2 magnitude earthquake.
We have declared a state of emergency in the west, the south, NIPS, and the province of Grand Anse. We have a medical emergency. The health ministry started distribution of medicines in the hospitals.
We'll go close to the epicenter in Haiti. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Taliban has seized control of Afghanistan. On Sunday, Taliban forces captured the capital, Kabul, facing almost no resistance as the government collapsed and President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. The U.S. and other foreign governments rushed to evacuate personnel, with the Pentagon sending back in 6,000 troops to assist in the effort. The Taliban takeover of the country came at a dizzying speed, causing panic and uncertainty after 20 years of U.S. occupation and war. Chaotic scenes are unfolding at Kabul airport as Afghans desperately try to flee. Some Afghans who were able to evacuate in recent days landed in nearby countries, including India.
I can't believe the world abandoned Afghanistan. Our friends are going to get killed. They're going to kill us. Our women are not going to have any more rights. And that's all. I can talk another day.
The UN and other aid groups are warning of a humanitarian crisis as more people attempt to leave Afghanistan and are urging neighboring countries to keep their borders open. The UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting today. Meanwhile, rights groups say the Biden administration needs to move much faster to evacuate Afghans who worked for the U.S. military and could face reprisals from the Taliban. We'll have the latest on the situation in Afghanistan after headlines. In Haiti, the death toll from Saturday's 7.2 magnitude earthquake has reached nearly 1,300, with at least 6,000 injured as search and rescue operations continue. Hundreds of homes were flattened, hospitals overwhelmed with trauma patients, with much of the damage in and around the southwestern city of Les Cayes. Haiti's Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, declared a one-month state of emergency Saturday. Henry called for international aid to be controlled by Haiti, not foreign actors.
In this crisis, we want more appropriate responses than those we received after the 2010 earthquake. All aid that will come from outside the country must go through civil protection.
Saturday's quake came a month after Haiti was plunged further into political turmoil following the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse, and as many Haitians are still recovering from 2010's devastating earthquake. Meanwhile, Tropical Storm Grace is hurtling towards Haiti, threatening to bring more destruction with flooding and mudslides. We'll go to the epicenter of the earthquake in Haiti for more later in the broadcast. The director of the National Institutes of Health has warned the United States could soon see 200,000 COVID-19 cases per day again. The current daily average of nearly 130,000 cases is already 700% higher than the beginning of July. This comes as new data confirm younger people are being hit worse than ever before, with hospitalizations of children and adults under 50 at record highs. The vast majority of hospitalizations are of unvaccinated people. In Texas, the Dallas Independent School District says it's keeping its mask mandate in place, even after the Texas Supreme Court ordered Dallas and another county to put a brake on such requirements, ruling in favor of Republican Governor Greg Abbott, who's seeking to ban mask mandates statewide. In New York, incoming Governor Kathy Hochul said she supports a mask mandate in schools when classes resume in September. In Los Angeles, a fight broke out at a right-wing anti-vaccine rally Sunday, resulting in a man being stabbed and an attack on a reporter for KPCC radio while he was conducting an interview. Meanwhile, the Homeland Security Department warned Friday domestic terrorists may be planning attacks motivated by the imposition of new COVID restrictions. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called snap elections for next month in the hopes of securing a parliamentary majority for his Liberal Party. Trudeau said the government's seeking a mandate from Canadians on how to handle the pandemic and eventual recovery.
This is a moment where we're going to be taking decisions that will last not just for the coming months, but for the coming decades. And Canadians deserve their say.
The early election comes as Canada's top public health officer recently declared Canada is now in its fourth Delta-fueled COVID wave. In Malaysia, Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin and his cabinet have resigned after just 17 months in power. He announced he'd be stepping down after losing his majority in parliament, though he's expected to remain as caretaker prime minister for now. His government's been accused of mishandling Malaysia's pandemic response, where infections are now surging. Malaysia is also facing an economic crisis triggered by the pandemic. In Pakistan, at least 12 people, including 4 children, are dead after a grenade attack Saturday night in Karachi. At least 8 others were wounded. A family was reportedly returning from a wedding reception when their vehicle was hit with a grenade. No one's claimed responsibility for the attack. In Lebanon, at least 28 people were killed and dozens injured after a massive fuel tank exploded in the region of Akkar on Sunday. Residents in the area reportedly gathered to obtain gasoline that was being distributed by the army after it seized the tank to prevent it from being smuggled or sold on the black market. Lebanon's catastrophic economic crisis has left most of the country without power as the government struggles to import enough fuel. In Nicaragua, police raided the offices of the national newspaper La Prensa, arresting its top editor. The government of President Daniel Ortega accused the publication and its editor of fraud, money laundering, and defamation. Ortega's ordered a wave of arrests targeting his critics and political challengers ahead of November's elections. This is a reporter from La Prensa speaking after the raid.
The objective of this is to silence us, silencing independent journalism and closing this media that has so much history. It has been more than 90 years.
In the occupied West Bank, at least 4 Palestinians were shot dead today after Israeli soldiers raided the Jenin refugee camp. 2 of the bodies were reportedly taken by Israeli authorities, and 2 other Palestinians were arrested, including one who was taken from his home by Israeli authorities. Ivory Coast has recorded its first case of Ebola in a quarter of a century. Officials are tracking recent contacts of the patient, an 18-year-old woman from neighboring Guinea who's being treated in intensive care. In June, Guinea declared the end of a 4-month Ebola outbreak that killed 12 people. This comes as West Africa is experiencing a surge in COVID-19 cases, and just days after Guinea confirmed its first recorded cases of Marburg virus disease, a highly virulent disease similar to Ebola. In Zambia, longtime opposition leader Hakainde Hichilema has been declared the winner of last week's presidential election with the support of younger voters, giving him a decisive edge over the incumbent president, Edgar Lungu. Lungu was accused of strong-arm election tactics but failed to overcome widespread dissatisfaction over Zambia's high inflation rate, rising food prices, and mass unemployment. He also faced allegations of human rights abuses and corruption. In southern Nigeria, Royal Dutch Shell has agreed to pay $111 million to Ogoni communities whose land was ravaged by oil spills over a half-century ago. Shell's payment caps decades of legal wrangling in a case that was first brought in 1991 over a pipeline that ruptured in 1970. The $111 million penalty is just a small fraction of Shell's annual profits, which totaled $16.5 billion in 2019. In climate news, thousands of people were forced to evacuate their homes in Utah over the weekend as a scorching heat wave helped fuel a fast-growing wildfire near the mountain town of Park City. In Northern California, the Dixie Fire grew to more than 550,000 acres. It's now the largest single fire ever observed in U.S. history, surpassing the Bootleg Fire in Oregon, which has burned over 410,000 acres since it began in July. In northern Turkey, at least 70 people are dead after torrential rains set off massive floods in the Black Sea region. Nearly 4 dozen others are still missing. Survivors described a wall of water tossing cars down streets, washing away bridges, buildings, and roads.
Several dead bodies were washed away in front of my eyes. There was a dog there with her puppies. I cannot get the screams of her out of my head. I really cannot. It was awful. It was really awful. Right now, I cannot be grateful that I am alive.
July was the hottest month ever recorded in nearly a century and a half of record-keeping. Land surface temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere last month averaged nearly 2.8 degrees Fahrenheit above historical averages. The Biden administration's approved the largest increase in Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP, in the program's history. Under the plan, monthly food assistance benefits will rise from $121 per person to $157, a 25% increase. The Biden administration says the boost in benefits will improve people's diets and will greatly reduce child hunger. About 1 in 8 U.S. residents relies on food assistance. And the New York State Assembly announced it will suspend its impeachment investigation into disgraced Governor Andrew Cuomo once he leaves office next week. Both Republican and Democratic lawmakers condemned the decision. Cuomo is being investigated for sexual harassment of at least 11 women, covering up nursing home COVID-19 deaths, and misusing state resources to write his book on the pandemic. New York State Assembly member Ron Kim said he'll continue to push for impeachment as he highlighted the flawed reasoning behind the Assembly's move.
If you stole from someone and then you're about to be indicted for theft, you can't avoid the indictment simply by returning what you stole once you learn what you're about to be indicted, when you're about to be indicted. That's what's happening right now with Andrew Cuomo.
Meanwhile, the New York Times reported that Cuomo confided to a labor lobbyist in 2018 that his reason for supporting Republican control of the New York Senate was because African-American Democratic Senator Andrea Stewart Cousins would, quote, give free breakfast to all black children, unquote. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Thousands of Afghans have fled to the Kabul airport in an attempt to leave Afghanistan a day after the Taliban seized control of the country. On Sunday, Taliban fighters entered the gates of Kabul and quickly took control of the presidential palace just hours after Afghan President Ashraf Ghani fled Afghanistan, flying to Tajikistan, saying he left to, quote, prevent a flood of bloodshed. Just hours after Ghani left, Al Jazeera aired video of the head of the Afghan presidential security guard shaking hands with a Taliban commander inside the presidential palace. One of the Taliban fighters inside the palace said he was a former prisoner at Guantanamo. Kabul fell a day after the Taliban seized the key northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif. Over the past 10 days, the Taliban has captured 26 out of Afghanistan's 34 provincial capitals. Some fell without a fight after the Taliban reached deals with local warlords. The Taliban offensive came as the United States is withdrawing its troops from Afghanistan after nearly 2 decades of war and occupation. The Biden administration is now rushing to send an additional 1,000 troops to Afghanistan to help evacuate U.S. citizens and allies. The total size of the U.S. force will soon be 6,000. U.S. troops have taken control of the international airport in Kabul, while thousands of Afghan civilians are hoping to flee Taliban rule. The U.S. has canceled all commercial flights. Video went viral this morning of hundreds of Afghans running alongside and trying to grab onto a U.S. Air Force jet as it attempted to take off. At least 3 people died after falling to their deaths while clinging on to a U.S. plane. Another died on the tarmac. Over 60 nations, including the United States, have joined together to urge the Taliban to protect foreign nationals and Afghans who want to leave Afghanistan out of fear the Taliban will again brutally control the country like it did between 1996 and 2001 before the U.S. invasion. We go now to Afghanistan, where we're joined by Ali Latifi, freelance journalist based in Kabul. We're also joined by the award-winning journalist Ahmed Rashid, author of many books, including Taliban, Militant Islam, Oil, and Fundamentalism in Central Asia. Ali Latifi, let's begin with you. You are in Kabul. Describe the state of the capital, which has fallen without the Taliban firing, well, it is unknown, but hardly a bullet.
Right now, it's pretty calm. It's pretty quiet. Just now, the streets are starting to pick up. A few more people are going out. A few more stores and restaurants and the like are starting to open back up. It's slowly going back to normal. And as you said, right now, things are, not a bullet has been fired. It's pretty calm. It's pretty normal. It's the exact opposite of the airport. The airport is chaotic and, just looks like a scene out of a movie, whereas the city of Kabul itself, right now, it's just pretty calm and quiet and just, people going about their business, Taliban driving around or, sitting around at different places, posing for pictures with people, talking to people. It's not anything like people were fearing yet. It seems in some ways similar to the stories of 1996, the first few days. But the other difference is that, slowly, like, women are coming out. Most are dressing as the with long scarves and, loose-fitting clothing. Some are wearing the chaudhari, or what the West calls the burqa. But generally, it's pretty normal.
So can you talk about the significance of the Taliban, of Kabul falling, the place where the U.S. had said there would be the most resistance, 4 million population, of course. It's the heart of the Afghan government of Ghani, who fled, and I'd like you to talk about that. But what does it mean that they hardly fired a shot? Is this indicating some support or enormous fear? I mean, over the weekend, as we called guests to be on the show, one guest after another, who we've not had trouble reaching in the past, we reached them, but they were absolutely terrified to come on. They refused.
I think because over the weekend, we had no idea what was going to happen. You know, I mean, even yesterday, early in the day, everybody was terrified. Everybody was scared. We all had, we didn't know if they would come storming in and firing and, committing massacres and, just pulling people over, pulling them out of their houses, and if it would be chaos. There was a lot of fear of that. And what sort of eased it was when the Taliban put out a statement saying, we have no intention of storming the city of Kabul. We will only send our people in once some kind of a settlement is made. And even then, we're sending them to sort of act as basically a security force, because most of the police, or actually all of the police, as far as I've seen, have essentially just absconded. They're not on the streets anymore. So that really, and then that, and also there were all these rumors of what a potential political structure would look like, and it included, famous political figures from the last 20 years, from the last 40 years, some even left over from the kingdom times. So that, kind of eased people's minds, thinking that if that comes true, then these other people can sort of hopefully counterbalance the Taliban so that they don't end up acting like they did in 1996, so that, some of the changes that have come to society, some of the things that have been regained or gained over the last 20 years, that they don't go away just because the Taliban are somehow
You keep referring to
power.
1996. Ali, a history lesson, please. Explain what was happening in Afghanistan at that time, a quarter of a century ago, 25 years ago, 5 years before the U.S. occupied and invaded.
When the Taliban first came to power in 1996, Afghanistan was in the throes of a civil war, especially the city of Kabul. The city of Kabul was full of commanders left over from the jihad against the Soviet occupation, who, once they defeated the Soviets and took down the communist government, essentially turned their guns on themselves because they couldn't agree to something like a unity government where each one would be given a different post, and they all essentially took different sides, different commanders allied with others, and one commander would fire rockets at the other, and that would end up essentially leveling the entire city of Kabul, because you can't control where a rocket hits. And their forces were also accused of all kinds of abuses. They were accused of land grabs, they were accused of rapes, they were accused of abductions, they were accused of theft, they were accused of physical violence, of all kinds of things. And the Taliban, seeing that, they sort of portrayed themselves as the counter to that, saying, don't worry, we'll deliver you from these warlords and we'll deliver you from the civil war.
In a moment, we're going to talk more with Ahmed Rashid about that situation. But I wanted to go back to President Biden, just to July 8th, talking about the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well-equipped as any army in the world, and an air force, against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable. But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely, but exactly what happened. Ahmed Rashid, you're speaking to us from Madrid, Spain, writer, award-winning journalist, author of a number of books, including Taliban, Militant Islam, Oil and Fundamentalism in Central Asia. You've covered the Taliban extensively. Talk about the reaction or the prediction of Biden and, again, what, in fact, is happening. with the Taliban. The media describing the scenes at the airport, the thousands of troops moved in, sounds like to protect the people from the Taliban. But apparently this is done with full Taliban cooperation. Ahmed Rashid.
Well, I think President Biden really was suffering from overextensive briefings from the intelligence and other parts of the government, which were absolutely wrong. I think the U.S. military got it right when they battled with Biden to try and keep more troops in for a longer period of time. The crux of the issue simply was that there was no preparation for this withdrawal. And, military and CIA and intelligence people, they planned for contingencies. What happens if this goes wrong, if this doesn't work out? Where's plan B, plan C? And there was none of this time around. You were extracting these American troops, expecting the Afghan government to stand firm, and there was absolutely no plan B. So I think, this has been one of the horrors. It's going to go down as one of the really big mistakes of U.S. policy, not just in the region, but in the world. And so I think that's the first thing. The other thing is that the U.S. was not supposed to withdraw without some kind of political settlement, or at least movement towards a political settlement between Kabul, the Kabul government, and the Taliban. And the U.S. was actually pulling out when there was no such settlement. Kabul and the Taliban had barely spoken to each other about the plan, any plan for an interim government, a coalition government. And, there was complete chaos. There was no understanding of what could happen and which did happen.
Before we go to break, I wanted to go back to Ali and ask about this agreement between the U.S. and Taliban at the airport and the significance of this massive rush to the airport of Americans, of Afghans who worked with the U.S. occupation, like the thousands of interpreters and their families, but also those who worked with the Afghan government. And also, was the fleeing of the Afghan president, who said he did this to avoid bloodshed, a shock to most people?
It was an absolute shock. It was completely unexpected, because if you look at the way Ashraf Ghani has presented himself throughout his presidency, it's always been as a fighter, as someone bold. During his inauguration in 2019, there were rockets that were fired into the palace grounds, and he famously sort of lifted open his vest to show that he had no Kevlar, no bulletproof vest or anything underneath that. And it became sort of a rallying cry for weeks. That clip went viral. There were car decals of it. So it really seemed like the exact opposite of the way Ashraf Ghani was billing himself. But unfortunately, the way that things were going in the last couple of weeks, it kind of seemed to fit with the narrative of the last 2 or 3 weeks, when provinces kept falling, when districts kept falling, and the government was largely silent. And not so much on the districts, but on the provinces over the last, 9 or 10 days, they were completely silent about it. They never confirmed a single province falling. So in that case, in the short term, it very much allied with everything that was going on at the time. But in the long term, it seemed to be the exact opposite of everything Ashraf Ghani billed himself as.
We're going to break. Ali Latifi, freelance journalist, speaking to us from Kabul, and Ahmed Rashid, award-winning journalist. We'll be back with them in a moment. Rose Without Thorns by Veronica Doubleday and John Bailey. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue the look at the Taliban seizing control of Afghanistan, as thousands of Afghans and foreign nationals are trying to flee Afghanistan from the international airport in Kabul. Earlier today, the Taliban released a video from Mullah Baradar Akhund, one of the founders of the Taliban.
We congratulate the great victory to the whole Afghan nation, especially to the people of Kabul and to our mujahideens. The way we have come through was unexpected, as we have reached a position which was never expected. But with the help of Allah that He has given us, the victory, and there is nothing like this in the history of the world, so we should thank Allah. We should have no arrogance. Now is the time to trial. We will give services to our nation. We give serenity to the whole nation. That will go as far as possible for the betterment of their lives.
Still with us is the award-winning journalist Ahmed Rashid, author of several books including Taliban, Militant Islam, Oil and Fundamentalism in Central Asia. He's speaking to us from Madrid, Spain. Ahmed Rashid, can you comment on what he has said, and also the fact that Kabul fell with really hardly a shot being fired, and there's clearly a coordination between the Taliban and the U.S. right now at the airport, the Taliban letting the U.S. control that, while it has now moved into the palace because President Ashraf Ghani has fled the country?
Well, the Taliban has been saying for several days now that people had nothing to fear in Kabul, and foreigners had nothing to fear. Journalists would be protected, so would women. But the problem is that nobody believed them, which is why we are seeing these horrendous scenes at the airport, people trying to get out. People are very doubtful that they will remain passive and not take revenge, not carry out revenge killings against, for example, soldiers, officers, people who resisted the Taliban all this time. And the Taliban has to rebuild its credibility because, remember, just before this takeover, there were months of assassinations taking place in Kabul of top officials, government officials, journalists, women, activists. Then the Taliban were going out of their way to eliminate the educated class, and that created real fear and panic in the whole country, not just in Kabul. So there's this legacy of brutality, quite recent, which the Taliban has to mitigate in some form or the other. Now, the next stage is obviously going to be humanitarian relief. I hope there's going to be some help from donors are going to bring in food and supplies, because there's a chronic shortage of food, water, medicines, and everything in Kabul right now. And, you know, business has stopped. Kabul was isolated for many days. All the produce that normally comes into the city has not been coming in. And so there is an urgent need for humanitarian relief, food, but also there has to be a way to distribute it. Will the Taliban be given the reins of all this food, etc., to distribute it themselves, or will it be an international NGO, the United Nations, or somebody else be given it? All these things will have to be negotiated very carefully with the Taliban.
What have you been, Rashid Ahmed, what have you been, Ahmed Rashid, most shocked by in these last few days? I mean, you who are steeped in history. And then I started by asking Ali Latifi about that history. But if you can even go back to the founding of the Taliban, we just heard one of the founders of the Taliban, and who exactly they are.
Well, I was one of the first journalists to meet with the Taliban in 92, the autumn of 92. And even then, they wanted to be seen as a very pious group who were fed up with the civil war, that their elders were fighting with each other. And they wanted in Afghanistan at peace. And they had two claims when they launched themselves. They said, we will disarm the population, a highly popular move at that time, and we will bring peace to Afghanistan. And they did initially. I mean, the first year or so when they conquered most of the South, again, without firing much of a shot, because people were so fed up with the civil war and the brutalities of the warlords that they easily succumbed to the ideas of the Taliban and supported them. It's later when the Taliban went up to Kabul to try and conquer Kabul, they changed their political stance very drastically. Before that, they had been saying, we do not want power, we will not take power, we will disarm the population, bring peace, and then ask our elders to choose a new government. Now, that was something quite novel at that time, but once they captured Kabul, they went back to becoming yet another warlord, saying, we will now rule Afghanistan according to our own principles, which were a Sunni sect called the Deobandism. Deobandis are very strict followers of the Prophet's life, and they are originated in India and are quite predominant in Pakistan, and that is where a lot of the Taliban learned their religious observance and their very strict adherence to these regulations regarding women, etc. So what we had was a very severe form of Islamic teaching, which the Taliban followed, and which none of the rest of the country really had any truck with. They weren't interested in becoming good Deobandis. The Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Hazaras, and even many of the Pashtuns had no interest in this. And the Taliban imposed this religious cult, if you like, on everybody else. And that was where the real conflict began. And that is what is really upsetting people today in Afghanistan, because they don't want to see the return of this kind of strict Deobandi Islam, when they practice an altogether different Islam. And they've been through 20 years now of getting educated, especially the young who've got jobs, who had an education, who were able to move around the country freely, go abroad, study, get scholarships, come home. All that now they see is coming to an end.
So these breaking news alerts keep coming in, and Taliban official says the group will soon declare the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Also, the question of the relationships with China, AFP reporting China is ready to deepen, quote, friendly and cooperative relations with Afghanistan, said a government spokesperson after the Taliban seized control of the country. The relationship Afghanistan will have with, for example, China, with Iran. And do you think the Taliban might take a more moderate approach now in what they are calling the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, and particularly say more about women?
Well, this is, the whole idea of the Islamic Emirate is what they established after they conquered Kabul in '96. And it was not accepted by anyone in Afghanistan and anyone outside of Afghanistan, except for three countries who recognized the government: Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, the Taliban are very keen now on getting international recognition. They've gone out of their way to travel to neighboring states to win them over. And the most recent visit they had was, in fact, to China, where they met the foreign minister of China, the highest level official who'd ever met the Taliban. And he asked them to make sure that they did not encourage the Uyghurs, the Muslim Uyghur population, which has been under tremendous repression in China, not to allow the Uyghurs into, not to give them training and not to turn them into guerrillas. And the Taliban, despite their Islamic zeal and their condemnation of non-Muslims and all the rest of it, they said, fine, we'll do that. We will restrict the activity of Uyghurs in Afghanistan so they do not create any problem for you. And it was an amazing declaration of the Taliban. Now, whether it is going to be kept, because don't forget, the Uyghurs and many other militant groups from Central Asia, Pakistan, are all very active in Afghanistan. And people don't see at the moment how the Taliban is going to get rid of them, even if they want to. And these groups include Al-Qaeda, of course, much depleted and reduced, but still very much a factor in Afghanistan. And a lot of these militants have been fighting alongside the Taliban. So it's not that the Taliban can just dump these people or shoot them. Many of them have settled down, have got married in Afghanistan, have got Afghan wives, and these militants are speaking the local languages. So these militants have become very well integrated into Afghan society, into Taliban society. Now, how the Taliban are going to deal with this is going to be the main preoccupation of the West, I think, and especially the United States. Because right now, if there are any militant groups around and the U.S. wants to bomb them, kill them, capture them, whatever, it's going to be extremely difficult. Because the closest American forces are much behind in the Gulf countries, and possibly in Turkey, which is a long way away from Afghanistan. And the role of women, simply, I think, is also we have to wait and see. I think they will allow minimal. I mean, what I've heard about education, for example, is that women will be allowed to study until grade 12, but they will not be allowed to go to university and other centers of higher learning. Now, that may be true, it may not be true. It may be a declaration that will be made that will not be implemented by some of the militants in the provinces, or it will be implemented in full by Taliban, who control the cities and who come into contact with men and women who are well educated every day. So it's touch and go. And I think that the main issue right now is what kind of government are they going to form? Will it include non-Taliban politicians, warlords, tribal elders, etc., or is it just going to be an exclusive Taliban government? That's what they really want, an exclusive Taliban government, no interference from wannabe politicians, but of course that will not be a representative government. And the danger always for the Taliban is going to be watching the ethnic minorities, making sure that they do not rise up in revolt down the road.
Ahmed Rashid, we're going to have to leave it there, but we hope to have you back soon as these developments are fast unfolding. Ahmed Rashid is a writer, award-winning journalist, author of several books, including Taliban, Militant Islam, Oil and Fundamentalism in Central Asia. And also thanks so much to Ali Latifi, journalist joining us from Kabul. Of course, we'll continue to cover this tomorrow and in the days to come. Coming up, we go to Haiti, where the death tolls reached 1,300 people following the 7.2 magnitude earthquake. Stay with us. Sun by Amaranta Pradine. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we turn to Haiti, where the government's declared a state of emergency after a major 7.2 magnitude earthquake, which hit Haiti's southwestern peninsula Saturday. Haitian officials say at least 1,300 people have died. Close to 6,000 are injured. Rescue workers are scrambling to find survivors as Tropical Storm Grace is barreling towards Haiti, expecting to bring heavy rains. Tens of thousands of people in the devastated areas are now sleeping on the streets due to unstable buildings that could still collapse amidst the aftershocks. This comes a month after Haiti was plunged into further political turmoil following the assassination of the Haitian president, Jovenel Moïse. On Sunday, Prime Minister Ariel Henry suggested an election set for November could be delayed. Henry had declared a month-long state of emergency in some of Haiti's provinces.
We have declared a state of emergency in the west, the south, NIPS, and the province of Grand Anse. We have a medical emergency. The health ministry started distribution of medicines in the hospitals.
Prime Minister Henry also appealed to international donors to do a better job helping Haiti than they did after the devastating 2010 earthquake that left more than 300,000 people dead.
In this crisis, we want more appropriate responses than those we received after the 2010 earthquake. All aid that will come from outside the country must go through civil protection. I do not want aid to arrive in a disorderly manner, where everyone decides what they want.
For more, we're joined by two guests in Haiti. In Jérémie, near the epicenter of the earthquake, we're joined by Natasha Majoba, Country Director for Haitian Health Foundation, and in Port-au-Prince, Anne Lay, CEO and co-founder of CORE, Community Organized Relief Effort. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Natasha, let's begin with you. You are right there. Jérémie has been devastated. Les Cayes. Can you describe the scene on the ground?
A lot of destruction, a lot of houses destroyed. The cathedral in downtown Jérémie has sustained a lot of damage. People are, the best way for me to describe it, traumatized, terribly scared. You mentioned people are sleeping outside in the streets, but it's not only because many are homeless, and in fact many are homeless, but there are many, many people that have decided to sleep out in the streets out of fear because of the many aftershocks that have been felt, and more destruction, and that their houses are going to come down on them. Interestingly, so last night, one of our main compounds, we had staff and other members of the community literally sleeping on the grass of the compound yard.
I remember this so well from just after the earthquake in 2010, when everyone was sleeping outside. Natasha Majoba, can you describe the moment of the earthquake and where you were, for example, and what people did at that moment?
Well, it has to be admitted that it was fortunate that it was about 8:30, or it was 8:29 in the morning, where most people were outside of their home, thankful to the fact that many go to the church, many go out to the market, etc. So that, I suppose, was helpful in the sense that we don't have a lot more devastation that is already in existence. The issue of the earthquake, it has to be said, is just like one more item in a very, very long list of traumatic events that the people of Haiti are sustaining. So there was a lot of shaking of the ground, a lot of things flying, people running, of course, out into the streets, screaming. It's a horrifying scene to see.
The mayor of Lakay, among many others, was also killed in the earthquake. Is that right? And describe, for people who are not familiar with Haiti, the southern peninsula, Lakay, Jérémie, how connected it is to the rest of the country.
Kai and Jérémie are in the southern peninsula of Haiti. And for example, Jérémie is about 6 to 8 hours driving from Port-au-Prince and about an hour by plane. And it's about an hour and a half connected to Kai, which is the largest next city to us in Jérémie. And it's about 3 hours from the city of Kai to Port-au-Prince. And it's connected by a main highway. Not what you would think of a highway in the U.S., but a main road from Port-au-Prince to Kai, and then another one road from Kai to Jérémie. It must be said that the road between Kai and Jérémie right now sustained a lot of destruction. The bridge to enter Jérémie has been damaged, which means at this time Jérémie is disconnected from the rest of the country. So all the aid at this time needs to come in via either airplane or by sea. The road is open to Kai, thankfully, and aid is arriving there. Also must be said that the situation in Kai appears to be a lot more severe than that of Jérémie. They really sustained a lot of damage, and a lot of the dead thus far.
We're talking to Nadasha Mikhoba, who is country director of Haitian Health Foundation. Go ahead, Nadasha.
Yes.
Let me ask you one other question. The corporate media in the United States immediately focus on, they say, and then people immediately started looting.
It's very fragile.
I think it would be very differently described in the United States when people are desperate after there was an earthquake, going for necessary supplies. How would you describe it?
Well, that's my biggest concern right now, the humanitarian disaster that is about to unfold. The situation here was fragile to begin with. Over the last year, the number of acute malnourished children has grown to about 61% across the country. Given the social political situation that the country has experienced over the last year, and the gang violence taking place in the Martesand area has made it very difficult for supply trucks to come into the Jérémie or even the southern peninsula of Haiti. So the markets here were fragile to begin with, the access to supply, the access to food items, not to mention the cost of those food items, because everything, when it does come in, has to come in under a lot of security, which creates, an additional cost to the vendors. So the situation is quite critical at this time. And now with the storm coming, I am petrified what that is going to do to the health of the community. The amount of rain that is going to come down, I can envision a lot of hungry, malnourished people, a lot of respiratory conditions, diarrhea, skin conditions with the deterioration of the hygiene situation. So yes, it's not something that you envision going to a market anywhere else, but rather the little markets are quite fragile right now. Unfortunately, there is some violence that is unfolding as well in some of the little towns in the area. So I think the critical nature of responding is going to have an impact on what unfolds over the next few days.
I want to go from Nadasha Mehoba in Jeremy, the country director of the Haitian Health Foundation, to Ann Lee, the CEO and co-founder of CORE, Community Organized Relief Effort. She's in Port-au-Prince right now. Ann Lee, talk about the state of the hospitals right now, both at the epicenter and around it. I mean, you have a country that is so hard hit. This impending storm that's barreling down on Haiti right now, this massive earthquake, and, of course, a country devastated by COVID.
What we're seeing right now is really an uncovering of the long-term disaster, which is the lack of systems and the investment in existing systems. The hospitals right now are overrun. There's shortages of basic materials, of bandages, of alcohol, of medical professionals. For us right now, what we ask for as people see this unfold from the comfort of their homes is to understand that, Haiti has been over so many decades struggling with these external shocks. And the last thing we need are short-term responses. We need to invest in these systems, groups like HHF, GESCIO, Partners in Health. These long-term health networks are what we need to invest in, and supporting them through materials, through additional surge capacity of medical professionals. We have to work through these systems and not in parallel. And that's what I hope that folks who are watching this unfold can understand, that all the help and assistance we need has to be long-term and to continue to support what's down there, the systems that are down there.
So talk specifically, for example, about the hospitals now, those who have been, they're still looking for bodies, but also for survivors, the airports being used as hospitals.
There's a number of locations right now where we have our medical mobile units, and essentially they're creating mini field triage centers. They don't have the capacity to take on very, very hurt individuals, but are able to kind of triage. But this is happening on the lawns of existing hospitals, or even in any green space that they can find. Right now, again, materials getting down to the south has been very difficult. The supply chain, again, as HHF has well stated, has been cut not just because of the landslides and the broken bridges, but also with the insecurity. To be able to cross through cities who are also frustrated for not getting support are creating road blockages. So again, supply lines are being cut. And so the need to get these supplies to these hospitals are so critically important. Air support, sea support, all those things are critically needed from external supporters.
And finally, there was a cholera outbreak after the earthquake, and it was from UN workers who were there, and it led to a complete devastation of Haiti. Your concerns right now, and we just have 30 seconds, Anne.
We need to learn from 2010. We need to learn that we have to essentially do no harm and think about building the systems and working within existing networks that are already on the ground, these local groups and the existing networks that are there, and not try to jump in and essentially do more harm than good.
Well, we will continue, of course, to cover what's unfolding, this catastrophe in Haiti. Ann Lee, CEO and co-founder of CORE, Community Organized Relief Effort. And again, thanks to Nadasha Mehoba, country director, Haitian Health Foundation, speaking to us from Jeremy, Ann Lee, and Port-au-Prince. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Is produced with Renee Feltz, Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Messiah Rhodes, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Terracena, Tammy Warrenoff, Charina Nadura, Sam Alcoff, Tamari Studio, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Honey Masood, Adriana Contreras. The general manager is Julie Crosby. Special thanks to Becca Staley. I'm Amy Goodman.